Hello and welcome to this, the first in a short series of videos on how to get the best out of your Kashflow system. In this video we're going to be looking at the basics of adding a new customer and invoicing a customer for the first time. First thing to do is to set up a new customer by clicking on the Customers tab. We can then add on Add New Customer. Key in the name for that new customer. Kashflow will automatically allocate a customer code to that new customer that you've just set up. You can either leave the code as it is if you're not particularly bothered, or if you have a method of allocating customer codes to your customer base, then feel free to change that code to whatever you want. So we might set this as for example. Then click on the create and we now have our basic customer created. On this next screen we can then start to add more and more details about the customer. So we can put in his address, we can add in the full contact name of the person that we speak to on a regular basis at that customer. We can add in their mobile number if we like, or the telephone number. Very importantly, their email address. Now we'll see why that's important later on, but essentially by using the email address we can email invoices straight to our customers. If we then click on the Update tab, that customer is now created on our customer base. Now, one thing that I found very useful in Kashflow and really important when we get to analysing the data and analysing our sales is working out where our customers come from, which of our marketing methods have proved successful in gaining those new customers. And we can create new sources of business using the Sources tab on the customer page. So we click on Sources and we can then add in where each customer might have come from. So for example, have they come from the website? Have they come from telesales? Have they come from direct mail? Or have they come from networking? Okay, so we can just carry on adding and adding more and more categories as we feel relevant. What we can also do there is add in the cost of each of those sources, and if it costs us 20 quid to acquire a client through direct mail, we can enter that in there, and we can very quickly see once we started adding some sales invoices, the value that we've got coming through from that source of business against the cost that we've incurred in generating that business. So if we now go back to our Customers tab, we need to allocate Joe Smith a source code. We click back into Joe Smith. If we click on the Options tab, we can see there the first thing that comes down is source. So selecting from our drop down list, let's say that Joe Smith came to us via a networking event. We can also add in things on there such as his VAT number, and we can add on the sales type that he usually buys from us. So we may have lots of different products and services that we buy, and we may want to every time Joe Smith is buying a particular product or service from us, so every time we add a new invoice to Joe Smith's account, we may want our sales type to default to that type, just to make things a little bit quicker with producing the invoices. We can change it within each individual invoice. We're not limited to using that default type, but it does help speed up the production of invoices sometimes. Now at the moment we haven't actually got any new categories in there, so I'm going to leave that as it is for the moment, and when we start going into the Sales tab I will show you how to add sales types. We then add our standard payment terms for this particular client. That will automatically default to the payment terms that we've set up in the overall program, but we can change it for each individual customer should we wish to, and we can apply a standard discount percentage to each of their bills if we use discounting. Click on update, and Joe Smith, our customer, is now updated, and we can see here at the top of the screen that a little message appears saying thank you for updating your customer details. And that's quite simply it. Once that customer is set up in the database, we never have to go through that process again for Joe Smith. We can get straight on now with raising an invoice to him for some work done. So the way that we do that is we would click on the Sales tab. Let's set up some sales types before we get into doing invoicing. I mentioned sales types a couple of minutes ago when we were on Joe Smith's customer tab. So if we click on sales types, automatically in the default setting when you first open Kashflow for the first time, we have sale of goods, credit charges and shipping. We're now going to enter some new sales types, so we're going to say we may do some training. Just click on update. We may do some consultancy. We can add that. Here we can add just bits and pieces. So for example, if we want to include that level of income on a self-assessment tax return, there are some reports later on in the program which will tell you, give you some data for your self-assessment tax returns. If you're in doubt whether you should include it or exclude it, you can exclude it for the time being, include it later if needs be. And then click on update again. So we've now got training consultancy. Let's have some retainer income. Okay, and we'll leave it at that for the time being. So if we now wanted to say that for Joe Smith, our first customer, we wanted to set him up with a default of training, the way we would do it is click back onto the Customers tab, select Joe Smith from the list, and on the Options tab, scroll down and change the sales type to training. Update. Okay. Right, so we've now given Joe some training and we want to invoice him for the work that we've done. If we click on the Sales tab, click on New Invoice, automatically when you open your first invoice in Kashflow it defaults to being invoice number 1. You can change that to be whatever the next number of invoices that you should be producing is. So let's say that's 456 just for a number. Automatically from now on, every time you create a new sales invoice, the next one, it will also add one on sequentially to the number that you start with. So automatically my next sales invoice will start with 457, 458, etc. If I had a number of customers added to my Kashflow database at this point, they'd all be available in my drop-down list in the invoice too. Alternatively, I can start to type a name in there and it will automatically select the right customer. Invoice date automatically defaults to the date that I'm creating the invoice, and the invoice due date automatically defaults to whatever credit terms I've set up for that particular customer. So in this case we set up at 14 days, so 14 days from the 5th is the 19th of September. And then we know we're going to add the invoice. Top part of our next screen just confirms those details. We then need to add some items to the invoice. This is the bit where we add in the work for the products or services that we've done for Joe Smith. So if we click on add an item to this invoice, you can see there that we entered earlier a default for Joe Smith being training, so it automatically comes through as his sales type. When we start to add a line to the invoice, we can change that by clicking this drop down key and selecting any of the other sales types that we've set up. But let's say we start with training, and we've done 5 hours training at £25 per hour. And then add in our unit. price, which is £25 an hour from above. Because we've already told the system we're VAT registered, it adds a default VAT rate of 20% on there, and works out the VAT at being £25 and the total of our invoice being £150. If I then click on add item, that then adds that item to our invoice, and we can see it there. We can add another item to that invoice, which we will do. Click on add another item tab, and then we're going to set this up as being some retainer work. So once retainer, £250 a month, automatically works the VAT out for me at £50 and totals the invoice at £300. Add item. Now at this stage I'll say that that's all I want to add to this particular invoice. So I've now two choices. I can either print the invoice or I can email it to the customer. Now what I'm going to do at the moment is I'm going to click on print, because that will create a PDF for you to see exactly what the invoice looks like when it's done. So you can see here the invoice has been created to Joe Smith. The two items on that we discussed: 5 hours training at £25 an hour, £125 plus VAT, and a 1 month retainer at £250 plus VAT, all added up. Now there are bits and pieces you can do in the settings menu to make your invoices a little bit more customised, such as adding logos up here and adding bank details down there, but I'll show you how to do that in a separate video. What we can do for now is, if we want to send this invoice to Joe Smith via post, we can print an envelope just by selecting C5 or DL, depending on the size of envelope we're using. Alternatively, we can send the invoice to Joe Smith via email, and to do that we click on the send via email button. Now what this does is automatically set up an email template to send to the customer, and it starts off with the email address at the top, joe@smith.com. That's the email address we set up on the customer tab when we first set that customer up. Automatically the subject becomes invoice from Video Training Limited. We can change that to be whatever we want, and we can change the message that we want to send to Joe to say whatever we want. So if we say, "Dear Joe, please find attached your invoice for this month." Now down at the bottom here I have some options. I can either save the changes I've made to this template, which means that automatically any new invoice that I send will have that text in it. I can save them as a new template, so rather than changing the standard template, it adds an additional template onto there. Or I can just send it, and it will then automatically, next time I send it, try and email an invoice, it will default back to the standard template you saw a moment ago. In addition, the invoice is there as a PDF attachment, and I can also add other files from my hard drive to send along with the email. But if I'm happy with everything that's there, I just click on send email and it'll be gone. If I now look back on my sales tab on that particular invoice, it will say down there at the bottom, invoiced email to Joe Smith on the 5th of September. And that brings us to the end of the first video on how to add a new customer and how to add a sales invoice.